an idol of Santos who played for the Brazilian national team, Atletico, Real Madrid, Manchester City and Milan, Robson de Souza, known as Robinho, received a 9-year prison sentence for participating in the gang rape of a 23-year-old woman. The crime took place in an Italian nightclub in 2013. At the time, Robinho was playing for Milan in Italy. Robson de Souza was born on January 25, 1984, in São Vicente, São Paulo. He was raised by his parents, Marina da Silva Souza and Gilvan de Souza. His mother was a caterer, while his father always made a living as a salesman. Robinho showed signs of his love for soccer since childhood. At that time, he became the leader of his indoor soccer team and scored 73 goals in his first season. A curious fact about Robinho's family was a tragic episode that happened to his mother. On November 6, 2004, Marina was in Praia Grande at a family barbecue and was kidnapped. After more than a month, the player's mother was released on a Friday morning in Perus, a neighborhood in the northern part of São Paulo. The police found Marina with very short hair and dehydrated, and this was a very traumatic episode for the entire family. At that time, the player was already gaining fame, and it was a well-deserved fame because the guy was truly talented. As a child, playing with some friends, Robinho caught the attention of a scout from a futsal club in Baixada Santista, Beira-Mar. The scout talked to his family, and Robinho and his parents liked the idea and accepted the invitation. And now you can imagine, right? The child, who was already a genius at soccer with his friends, joined futsal and developed much more technical skills and ball control. After a few years, he left that team, Beira-Mar, and went to another club, this time in Santos, Portuários. There he continued to excel. And then, shortly after, an opportunity arose in Santos's futsal, one of the largest and most traditional clubs in the country. In 1996, Robinho tried out for the club's children's soccer team. He was accepted. And we found some interesting information here, huh? Believe it or not, when this kid was 15 years old, he caught the attention of none other than Pelé. That's right. Pelé was a great boost in Robinho's career, and this, of course, increased the player's visibility to sign a permanent contract with Santos. When he turned 18, he started playing for the club's main team. Robinho played for Santos's professional team for the first time in the Rio-São Paulo tournament in 2002. However, in that championship, the team did not have very good results, and the coach in charge at the time, who was Celso Roth, was replaced by Emerson Leão. Then, with Leão in charge of the team, some young players like Robinho, Diego, Leo, Elano, Renato, Alex, André Luiz, and Marinho were mixed in with more experienced players on the field, and it ended up working very well. Not surprisingly, it led the team to win the 2002 Brazilian Championship. It was an event that put Diego and Robinho on the radar of the entire country, since the two were largely responsible for helping lead the club to the title and ending a drought that had lasted 18 years. After all, the last time Santos lifted the trophy was in the Campeonato Paulista in 1984. Robinho also helped Santos reach the final of the 2003 Copa Libertadores, but they ended up losing to Boca Juniors in the final. After that Brazilian season, the player signed a 5-year contract with Real Madrid. He played 43 matches in total and performed well, helping the team win La Liga in 2006-07 and 2007-08, at the same time that the team was coached by Bernd Schuster. At that time, he ended up becoming a regular player and was one of the main reasons for Real Madrid's good form. But this good atmosphere on and off the pitch didn't last long. Shortly after, Robinho ended up clashing with the coach and tried to force his departure from Real Madrid by calling a press conference to open up and show that he was unhappy. The attempt was successful, and he ended up transferring to Manchester City on September 1, 2008, for €40 million. which at the time was equivalent to 96 million rees. At Manchester, Robinho stood out even more and was one of the top scorers in the Premier League, scoring 14 goals. In addition, he was the Citizens' main star player in the 2008-09 season. When the new coach, Roberto Mancini, took over, his performance dropped and he ended up being dropped from the starting lineup. It was at this time that he was loaned to Santos and had a second successful spell there, resulting in 2 titles, Campeonato Paulista and Copa do Brasil. However, on August 31, 2001, he signed a 4-year contract with Milan, costing the Italian club 18 million euros, 40 million reais, less than half the amount that Manchester City had paid to sign him 2 years earlier. In September 2012, São Paulo began negotiating with the player so that he could replace midfielder Lucas Moura, who had been sold to Paris Saint-Germain. Robinho wanted to return to Brazil in order to gain more visibility as the coach of the Brazilian national team, already dreaming of a spot in the 2014 World Cup. He even tried to negotiate with Flamengo, which didn't work out very well, so he stayed playing in Europe for a while. On August 5, 2014, after several negotiations, he was officially announced as a Santos player on his second loan to the team, and his contract ended on June 30, 2015, when he agreed to go to Guangzhou Evergrande in China on a 6-month contract. After that period, he was signed by Atlético Mineiro, returning to Brazil in 2017. He joined Sivasspor in Turkey, went to Istanbul Başakşehir, and in 2020, he returned to Santos for good, where on July 4, 2022, at the age of 38, he officially announced his retirement from football. Robinho's resume in the sport shows a talented boy who became a successful man, played for big clubs in Brazil and around the world, and would end his career on the eve of his 40s, like most football players, in an honorable way, as we see happen with many idols out there. But that's not the only story. He wasn't just the athlete Robinho, shining on the field or not, in good times and bad, because off the field, there was still Robson, and he was involved in controversies that tarnished his career forever. While Robinho was still playing for Manchester in July 2009, he married Vivian Junce Guglielmetti. Before getting married, they had a long relationship because they started dating when they were still 15. The ceremony took place in Guarujá on the coast of São Paulo and was attended by soccer stars such as player Kaká, coach Dunga, and other Santos teammates. Vivian and Robinho had 2 sons, Robson Jr. and Gianluca. In January 2009, the same year they got married, British newspapers The Sun and The Times published an allegation of alleged sexual assault against Robinho, which had allegedly occurred in a Leeds nightclub. The player was questioned by the West Yorkshire Police and denied the accusations, being released on bail. In April of that year, the local police decided not to pursue the case, and the player was released from this charge. In 2011, the player announced on Twitter that he was divorcing Vivian. This caused a lot of buzz at the time because outsiders thought it was a meeting of soulmates from adolescence to life. And to the joy of the couple's fans, Vivian and Robinho soon got back together. However, in 2013, an accusation would occur that Vivian did not yet know could change forever not only her relationship, but the way she saw Robinho as a man. After all, what happened 10 years ago changed the way many women saw Robinho as a man. What tarnished Robinho's history forever happened on January 22, 2013, but the world only found out about it more than a year later. In October 2014, the Italian newspaper Corriere dello Sport published a report on an investigation by the Italian Justice Department into an alleged gang rape case involving Robinho. The abuse allegedly took place in a Milan nightclub when he was still playing for Milan, The initial information was that the victim was an 18-year-old girl of Brazilian origin, but, in fact, it was a 22-year-old Albanian woman. The identity of this woman has not been revealed. In the podcast O Esportes, Os Pegas de Robinho, she is referred to as Helena. Helena already knew Robinho and some of his friends. They were with a group of people at the CO Cafe in Milan for the birthday party of one of them, Rudine, who had turned 34 the night before. Helena herself was there to celebrate her 23rd birthday, which was the following day. A pagode band owned by an acquaintance of Robinho, Jairo, was going to play, and Vivian, Robinho's wife, made special decorations for the birthday event, especially since the player himself was going to go on stage to play a song with the band. The place was known for holding Brazilian parties, with pagode, funk and such, and it worked as a kind of meeting point for Brazilians at Italian clubs. In addition to Vivian and Robinho, Jairo, the guy from the band, Rudine Gomes, his friend who was celebrating his birthday, Clayton Santos, a.k.a. Claytinho, Alexandro da Silva, Fabio Galan, and Ricardo Falco, who knew some of the girls, especially Helena, were at the party. At a certain point in the night, some people left, and it seems that Robinho took his wife home, but he returned soon after to CO Cafe, this nightclub. All of Robinho's friends stayed there and were drinking heavily. Helena was also drinking along with everyone else. But she drank too much and suffered the famous PT that 11 out of 10 people who drink have suffered. The men noticed her drunken state and took her to the nightclub's cloakroom, which was a less targeted place, and, taking advantage of her state, had multiple and consecutive sexual relations without her consent. In other words, the victim was gang raped. Helena was not in an alcoholic coma, so to speak, and remembered flashes of that night. The very next day, she contacted Falco, telling him that his friends had taken advantage of her and that she wasn't that kind of girl. But he tried to convince her that she was imagining things, that the guys were good people, and that if something had really happened, it was because she had accepted it. No matter how much Helena said that, although she didn't remember everything, she remembered that she hadn't consented. Falco was ready to defend his friends. And little did she know that she had also been a victim of Falco himself. After all, one of the genetic materials found on the dress she wore that night, which she handed over to the police sometime later, was his. But before that, Helena, certain that she had been sexually abused, went to the police and gave her statement. That's where the whole story of Robinho's wiretaps begins, because she was absolutely certain that the Brazilian player was one of her attackers. With him as a guide, the police made sure to investigate incisively. The Italian police also tapped Robinho's car as well as his phone. It was in the car that most of the evidence against him was collected. Since the accusation came to light, Robinho's defense did what it was hired to do. It tried to create a line of defense for the accused. In its main arguments, it was that first, there was nothing in the nightclub security cameras that proved that the abuse had actually occurred. Second, if there had been any sexual intercourse, there was no evidence that it had not been consensual, just as there was no evidence that the woman was also unconscious. In this state, in addition to obviously not having been consensual, the sexual act would also be characterized as rape of a vulnerable person, because the person would not even be able to try to defend themselves from the abuse. And that is where our collective problem with Robinho begins. In the first wiretaps, you can already see that he is very calm, and not because he did nothing, but because there was no way to prove that he did anything. Robinho, who had claimed to be innocent from the beginning, upon learning that he was involved in an accusation of sexual abuse, he laughed, and said that the girl was completely drunk, laughed, and said that it was a good thing he had nothing to do with it. The first wiretaps and telephone interceptions revealed a conversation on January 3, 2014, at 10:47 p.m., between Jairo and Robinho. Jairo is one of the friends involved in the accusations, as a witness to the facts, and has been, since the player arrived in Milan, his contact to resolve professional and personal issues, since Robinho went to the country without speaking Italian and received this contact indication there. It was Jairo who broke the news that the house was falling apart because the girl had accused him, and the police were after 6 Brazilians who were at Sio Cafe that night. Robinho was one of them. But the player was emphatic when he said, "The boys are in deep shit. Thank goodness there is a God, because I didn't touch that girl." Unaware that he was already being tapped by the Italian police, 9 days later, on January 12, 2014, Robinho says he didn't remember this woman. Well, if he didn't remember this woman, how did he know, or did he remember, that he hadn't touched her? And it gets even worse when, 12 days later, on January 24th, with the same Jairo from the first conversation, he says in no uncertain terms that he hadn't had sex with the woman, but he had tried. Jairo even goes so far as to tell him that he saw Robinho put his penis inside her mouth. The wiretaps of Robinho's phone and car show that the concerns of the 6 involved in the rape were diminishing each time they realized that it was difficult for the police to have proof of what happened. This, of course, was because they had no idea that they were being overheard from all sides. But when they discussed, for example, the lack of security cameras at the place where the victim claimed to have been raped, they thought that if there were no cameras, how could they prove anything? Apart from the part where he contradicts himself, which happens practically all the time, Robinho is always very emphatic in saying that Helena was too drunk to know what she was doing or who she was talking about, and that she didn't even know him, and he didn't even remember who he was, that he was safe from that. And if it was left to his friends, well, in Robinho's own words, "I don't care." Jairo, the guy in the band, was the first to officially testify. He tells Robinho that he received a call from an unknown number, that it was the police calling, and that he said he would go, but he didn't. Later, the same number calls again. The police, impatient, ask if Jairo wants them to pick him up somewhere to give a statement. When he tells this to Robinho, Jairo is apprehensive, while Robinho laughs, and laughs, and laughs. Jairo says that he told the police that Helena was happy and laughing, that she wasn't drunk to the point of falling down, that she wasn't unconscious, and that she knew what she was doing. In other words, in his statement, he contradicts what Robinho himself says in this conversation, since the player tells Jairo that she was very crazy. Jairo's call had a purpose, to warn Robinho about what was to come. But he, very calm, said that he wouldn't give anything away. After all, in his words, he didn't have sex with the girl. Robinho tells Jairo that the ones who had sex with the girl were Rudine, Cleitinho, and maybe Alex, Alexandro, and Galan, as he calls Fabio Galan. He also says a very emblematic phrase to his friend Jairo: "Those who don't owe, don't fear." One of the people who feared him the most, however, was Ricardo Falco. Of all the people in the group that night, Falco was Robinho's newest friend. They met after Jairo, the pagode singer who also worked as the player's driver, recommended Ricardo for the job. Ricardo had been living in Italy for a long time, had an Italian passport, and had other friends besides Robinho, one of whom was Helena. What he didn't have was a job. He lived off odd jobs and even counted on his famous friend's recommendation to get a job in the United States, where he wanted to go next. He, who is known by the group as Falapuco, precisely because he talked a lot, is the only one sentenced to prison alongside Robinho at the conclusion of the trial. And, like the player, he is in Brazil. He had no idea that he was being recorded by the police, or that Helena gave the dress she was wearing that night as evidence of the crime, and that it contained biological material, or sperm, from 2 men. He was one of them. But until he found out about this, he and Robinho tried over the phone to create countless different narratives that, in their minds, would work very well. In the All Esportes podcast, Falco says horrible things. He claims in the calls with Robinho that he tried to get inside her head, that is, the victim's head, to make her believe that she was mistaken, that things hadn't happened that way. He describes the attempts to manipulate the narrative as soon as Helena seeks support from him, whom she considered a friend, to tell him that she was abused by the men at the party he had invited her to. Falco claims to have spoken to Helena after the party when he saw her crying, and she even demanded of him, "Come on, not even to help me." And that he would have said to her, "But you were there with the guy. How was I going to help you? I thought you were there because you wanted to be." And he also says that the victim added everyone on Facebook and spent a year trying to get information from those involved, who were already in Brazil but was unable to. Falco says she was naughty. For him, what Helena wanted was to show off, become famous, and suddenly make some money at the expense of the famous player. That would indeed be a possibility, but that was not what Helena was doing, and Robinho knew it. So much so that in several audio recordings, he shows a mix of apprehension and relief when he talks to his friends about the lack of security cameras at the place where the abuse allegedly took place. An innocent person is innocent whether or not they are recorded by security cameras, and only the guilty get suspicious when there is the slightest chance that the crime was recorded on video. Another weak link in the chain of abuse is his friend Cleitinho. It is possible that it was to him that Helena bluffed on Facebook days after the incident, saying that she was pregnant, to scare him and get information about the abuse in order to take the case to the police. It was Cleitinho, in fact, who gave the full names of everyone involved that night, and that was how the Italian justice system tried to get to the bottom of the accused one by one. He is one of the friends Robinho tries to blame all the time in the audios, especially in conversations with personal trainer Fabio Gallan, another friend who was there that day. With him, Robinho says that the only thing he was sure of was that he and Galen had not had sex with the victim, who Fabio treats as a slut. Fabio Gallan and Robinho exchanged long conversations, laughing because they both had a hard-on and, therefore, did not come inside the victim. This conversation alone shows that they were present and active in committing the crime they want to get away with. They also show concern, but not much, about the possibility that CO Cafe will be closed for not handing over the security camera footage. They also speculate a lot about who could have come inside when they still think Helena was pregnant. In addition to Cleitinho, they mention another person who no longer appears in any conversation and was not named in the case, and Rudine, the birthday boy, that night. In Falco's statement, he told the police that Robinho had never seen the victim before. But Robinho not only saw Helena at another nightclub before this incident, but he also made her touch his abdomen and licked one of her breasts. In fact, they had met in 2011. She went to his birthday party in 2012, and at CO Cafe on that night in 2013, Robinho was seeing Helena for the third time in his life. Witnesses she sought out on her birthday, which was the day after the nightclub, said in their statements that she was crying a lot, didn't remember much of what had happened, but was sure she had been raped, and not by one man, but by several. The friends who took her in at that time encouraged her to go to the police, but first she did her own private investigation, so to speak, talking to Cleitinho on Facebook and trying to understand everything that happened that night. She said she would file a complaint, but she did not provide details of the evidence she had to hand over to the police. She even bluffed about the pregnancy, as we have already said, to scare them and make them take the situation seriously. She told the police what she remembered when she went with her lawyer to file the complaint and file the lawsuit with the Milan prosecutor's office, and, wiretap by wiretap, Robinho described exactly the same thing she had said from the little she remembered. It is also worth mentioning that she, the victim, had her phone tapped, as well as the phones of her friends who had given statements, because the public prosecutor wanted to rule out any possibility of the so-called scam that Robinho's friends thought she wanted to pull. But unlike his wiretaps, in Helena's they found nothing, absolutely nothing, that showed that she had created a lie to get money from someone. And when Robinho finally admits, in a conversation with Jairo, the pagoda singer, that he tried to have sex with her, and Jairo says he saw the player put his penis in her mouth, at which point Robinho laughs and says, quote, "But that's not sex," unquote. The Italian justice system had her word, Helena, and his word, Robinho, as proof that the rape had really happened. With the siege closing in, Robinho stops laughing about the situation and starts worrying about his own situation. His fears, of course, were selfish, not being able to play in the World Cup, having his career tarnished. He even made a promise to God, since he is a very religious man, that he would never again get involved with any woman other than his wife, Vivian, asking for protection for himself and his family. There is no way of knowing, but I would say that this story made two women victims. The first, indisputable, is Helena. The second is Vivian, Robinho's girlfriend since adolescence, and who, when involved in the confusion, deeply felt the humiliation that was not hers, but her husband's. Vivian. Before she knew that Robinho was involved in the crime, since he himself told her that it was his friends who were being accused, and that their family's biggest problem would be having the player's name involved in a crime that his friends committed, Vivian went to the lawyer with him to put together a defense strategy. But after testifying as a witness, since she was at CO Cafe the night it all happened, things changed a lot. Vivian felt humiliated. In her words, she seemed like the cuckolded wife who knew nothing. In her audios, you can feel both the concern and the shame of seeing her husband's name involved for the second time in a rape case. She asks Robinho to tell the truth to the authorities, to tell the truth to her, and he continues to deny that he did anything. But in this recording, talking to Vivian in the car, he admits that he saw everything, and that it was his friends who abused Helena. Vivian asks him again to tell the authorities this and to stay away from his friends. She also suggests, quote, "He'll need to be arrested," unquote, as if to say, he'll need to be arrested to see that these friendships are bad. At another point, she says that she even said to the investigator something like, "If that's the case, I don't know the man I sleep with," and that the investigator offered her nothing less than empathy, that she knew she had nothing to do with it, and that she was very sorry that Vivian was being deceived in that way by a guy she had known since she was 11 years old. The only time the audio captures Vivian crying is when she thinks about the possibility of Robinho being arrested. She is a woman who loves her husband, who has 2 children with him, crying over a potential arrest for a crime she didn't commit. The conviction. Falco remained faithful to Robinho until the end, who, at this point in the game, already wanted to blame his friends who were in Brazil and wouldn't be tried just because of that. When the Italian justice system looked for them, they were no longer there, and they couldn't go to trial. Clayton, Rudine, Alex, and Galen were acquitted because they could not be found by the Italian justice system. As for Falco and Robinho, as they were officially notified, they went to trial and were charged with the crime under Article 19 of the Italian Penal Code, which deals with group sexual violence. 10 years later, the wiretaps were made by the police at the request of the Italian Public Prosecutor's Office and attached to the case, which concluded with the former player's sentence to 9 years in prison. This decision was made by the first instance, then by the second instance by the Court of Appeal of Milan, Italy, in December of 2020, and confirmed by the third instance where there is no longer any appeal, on January 19th of 2022. Robinho's arrest. Robinho was arrested on March 21st of this year by the federal police. He was in the building where he lived, in the Aparecida neighborhood, in Santos, on the south coast of São Paulo. From there, he was transferred to Tremembé in the Paraíba Valley, where he began serving his sentence in P2, a prison that usually houses inmates convicted of high-profile crimes in the country. After entering the São Paulo prison system, Robinho spent 12 days in isolation in P2. From then on, he began to live in a common cell, with the presence of another inmate. In isolation, he was alone in a cell of approximately 8 square meters. The period was used for adaptation and to carry out necessary assessments by the prison staff. Also, during the days of adaptation after arriving in Tremembé, all activities, such as sunbathing, were restricted. After leaving the isolation period, Robinho gained the right to receive visitors in the prison. The most recent update in the case involving the former player was the judge's decision to allow Robinho's wife and 3 children to visit him in P2 together. Since Brazilian law does not allow the extradition of citizens born in other countries to serve their sentences, the STJ decided to imprison Robinho here in Brazil to serve his sentence. The Special Court of the Superior Court of Justice, STJ, decided that Robinho's friend, and also convicted of rape in Italy, Ricardo Falco, should serve his sentence in Brazil. He was arrested in São Paulo in June of this year. According to the lawyer, Ricardo Falco and Robinho no longer have a friendly relationship, having separated shortly after the investigation began. Back to soccer. In the company of other inmates in P2, Robinho began to participate in activities at the prison, including the one that made him famous in the country, soccer. In P2, the games are different from what the former player was used to. The ball is not professional, and there is no specific uniform for the games. The teams are varied and chosen by the inmates. There are also no championships. To participate in the games, Robinho asked his relatives for soccer shoes so he could wear them to the games. In addition to soccer, he also started going to the outdoor gym on site. In May of this year, Robinho began a professional training course in basic electronics, radio, and TV. He also started participating in reading groups in an attempt to reduce his sentence. A sentence reduction was actually one of the former player's defense requests during this period. Robinho's lawyer had filed a lawsuit with the courts requesting that the crime for which the former player was convicted be considered common and not heinous. Brazilian law classifies rape as a heinous crime in the country. However, the court denied the defense's request in July and upheld the decision in September. The goal was for Robinho to spend less time in prison. In Robinho's case, since he was convicted of rape and is a first-time offender, he must serve at least 40% of his sentence to progress to the next level. If the defense's request were accepted by the court, it would change the sentence to 20% in a closed regime. In practice, instead of serving 3 years and 7 months in a closed regime before progressing, Robinho could serve 1 year and 8 months in the most severe regime.